Hello, thank you. I am supposed to discuss with you during these 15 minutes about the question of planning for a sustainable child and adolescent psychiatry, and the answer is that nobody knows today how to plan a sustainable child and adolescent psychiatry. But many times in IACAPAB Congress, in such symposium, people ask us how many child and adolescent psychiatrists should there be for 100,000 inhabitants? How many beds? How many psychologists? How many? And you can read the literature, there is no answer to this question. And so I said to these people, okay, I promise I will think to the question, and so this is the very beginning of the story. So, first point, which is important, if you ask to my colleague in public health how to design a healthcare system, they will answer immediately, how many patients do you have? And so, this is just like AIDS. How many people have AIDS? If it is 100,000, then you need this amount of medication and this amount of physician. In our discipline, like in other disciplines, this is not the same thing at all, because when the supply of mental health increase, the demand increase also. If you consider ADHD, for instance, if you have very few child and adolescent psychiatrists, they will see only the most severe patients. If you increase the number of child and adolescent psychiatrists, they will have all the time more patients with low level of severity. And so you cannot adapt supply to needs, because when supply augments, needs augment. So the problem is much more complex. Second point, you could say, okay, but perhaps we could define some kind of objective needs. That is, I am going to do an epidemiological study, like there are in Australia or in North America, and we have prevalence of mental disorder, and so we have prevalence of ADHD, and so we can plan how many child and adolescent psychiatrists we need. And also, this is not so simple, and there has been a really important paper published in the Archive of General Psychiatry in 1998 by Spitzer, you know, the creator of the DSM, and the title of the paper is Diagnosis and Need for Treatment Are Not the Same, which is a major issue in epidemiology, in psychiatric epidemiology. When you have studies that say the prevalence of ADHD is 6% in kids aged between 6 and 10, it does not mean that 6% need to be treated. It means that they correspond to box with ticks in a questionnaire, and that's all. So you cannot design a healthcare system with the epidemiological prevalence. So you will tell me, okay, this is true, but there is also in epidemiology the notion of clinical relevance. We have ADHD, but we also ask for impairment, level of disability, and if this impairment is high, then you have a real patient with objective needs. And even that, this is not true. You have a paper by Spitzer and Wakefield which say, okay, do you think that impairment and disability define a psychiatric patient? This is not true, because you make a very strong hypothesis. Why impairment? Why disability? Why not psychic mental suffering? And so these figures coming from epidemiology also can be challenged. So you could say we are going to do an epidemiological study with clinicians that will rate the level of need of the patient. And we did that in France, and it happens that clinicians are biased. When clinicians see children in the general population, and when you ask them, are they patients, they will say yes, most often, that it is needed. And because we have a bias, because when we see patients, these patients are here because by definition, they don't feel good. While in the general population, you can have kids with symptoms, but if they are not here, sometimes this is just because they don't feel bad. And so we have not to treat them. So, you see, at the end of the slide, I see mission impossible, but necessary. Necessary. We need anyway to have such kind of figure, but at the moment, science is a little bit short to provide clinically relevant prevalence of mental disorder. This is the first point. Now, how to do? First, in child and adolescent psychiatry, we have research in neuroscience, in social and human science, in epidemiology, and very few research in health economy. And this is a disaster. This is a disaster because we need research in health economy to prove that our treatment are cost effective and our healthcare system is efficient. And in fact, the answer to sustainability, of course, will come from health economy. And the point, considering the previous slide, is that we will not have an approach of health economy in the top-down perspective. You know, top-down, that is, public health professional which say you have 6% of ADHD children, so you need 600 child and adolescent psychiatrists in Australia. No, this is a top-down approach, but because we have no prevalence, the top-down approach cannot work. You need also a bottom-up approach, that is, what are the demand of the population, not the needs, but the demand. And the demand vary across how the society is feeling itself, you know. If there is an attentat, for instance, the demand of healthcare consultation increase for mental health problem, even if there is no more disorder, but because of the level of anxiety in the population, the demand for consultation increase. And so we have also to adapt to the demand. First point, bottom-up and top-down procedure. Second point, and this is in line with the presentation of Nick, you have to consider a vertical organization and horizontal articulation. The vertical articulation, I think in his presentation, it was a step. I used to say a step.
Step care.
Step care. This is done in most countries. You know, you have first primary care, and indeed you need to train GP, school nurses and teachers for a culture in child and adolescent psychiatry, because they are at the first contact of our patient, and they are likely to be the people who are going to say, okay, there is a problem, you should contact the first line of specialized care. And the big question about the first line of specialized care is, should there be some child and adolescent psychiatrists in the first line of specialized care? And the answer depends on the country. In most countries, the answer is no, because this is not sustainable. There is not enough child and adolescent psychiatrists for the first line of specialist care. Then you have a second line, and most often this is where child and adolescent psychiatrists appear, and you have the third line for the resistant patient, for university hospital, and this is where there is research, because research is always very important in a healthcare system. And you have some percentage here, and this percentage has to be included in health economic model. A little bit like in Great Britain, where you have gatekeeper. You know, it has to be decided a priori between primary care and first line specialized care, in average, what is the percentage of children that will come from the primary care to the first line, so that the system is sustainable. So this is the vertical approach, and you have also the horizontal approach. This is in line with my presentation of yesterday. You have also a gray zone, you have also prevention program, but the main point is that the budget is not the same. The budget is not the same. For the vertical perspective, we are in the healthcare system, and the money comes from the health insurance. For the vertical perspective, where there is disability, mental health, this is no more the healthcare system, and so the money does not have to come from the health insurance. It has to come from the social budget. If it is not the case, then there will be a shortage of money for the healthcare system. So we have to be very clear about that with politicians. And there is something very stimulating at the moment. E-health technology appear. This is a little bit the Far West with many applications, hundreds of applications, some very cheap and quite attractive, some a little bit crazy, very few evaluation. So we don't know at the moment if this is indeed useful, but it is sure that for the future we will use these e-health technologies, and of course it will increase the productivity of the system because it does not cost that much. So this was for high-income country. For low and middle-income country, this is completely different. And I will just give you an example. Do you know in India how many children and adolescents at the moment have suffered from sexual abuse? 170 million of girls, 50 million of boys. More than 200 million, and there are 60 child and adolescent psychiatrists. And so we had in Singapore a research meeting, and there was a psychologist from India, a child and adolescent psychologist, designing CBT for children with a sexual trauma. But we said, how do you want to deal with 200 million of patients? Your project is very interesting, but it will be just a small thing in an ocean. So you have to adapt completely your healthcare proposition to the reality of your country. And so at the moment nobody knows also how to deal with such an amount of demand of needs and such a shortage of healthcare proposition. What is sure is that first, evidence-based medicine should be considered very carefully, because most often evidence-based practice are not sustainable in low and middle income countries. This is the same for screening. If you cannot provide care, this is meaningless. You spend money for nothing. So evidence-based medicine and screening for low and middle income countries, in a way, forget it. Or consider it differently. Second point, this is Olayinka Omigdobun, our colleague in Nigeria, a very fascinating woman that told me one day, there is no low-resource country in child and adolescent psychiatry. We have different resource countries. And so, for low and middle income country, you have to work with the local resource. And this is the solution. And so, first you have to understand the cultural specificities and the specificity of the country. Then after, you have to train people. The question, we are going to see that, is how to train people, which is a real challenge. And in addition to training, there is a need for supervision. You cannot consider that you enter a country, you teach, and after you leave and you let people alone. This is likely to be a disaster. You have to still be present from time to time for a supervision. So how to train? And here are 3 ways to train, how to train people and family and teacher. First proposal, this is a Yakapap MOOC, Massive Open Online Course. 22 video. This is free. Subtitle is English, Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, Russian, French. All the language of United Nations. This is free. It happens every spring in April. We have 5,000 students each year. Okay. With teachers coming from different countries, so that we try to be transcultural. We try, but we didn't succeed completely, because when you find a professor of child and adolescent psychiatry in China, what he says or what she says is very similar to what I say and to what say a colleague from North America. this is very difficult to have transcultural professor of child and adolescent psychiatry because they are all trained more or less in the same country, and when they do research, they publish in the same journal with the same science. So we did as we could. This is not bad, but we didn't succeed completely. Anyway, this is free, and this can be proposed to parents, to teacher, to nurse in all countries. There is ICAM training, and Nick knows that very well because he did it in many countries. This is a way to train GPs or pediatricians or even specialized nurses to child and adolescent psychiatry. And in particular, it relies to the Yakapap e-textbook, which is free also, and which is a well-known book in child and adolescent psychiatry. Okay, this is the second possibility. The third possibility also is the WHO MHGAP. WHO proposed a booklet with some kind of algorithm to propose to GP or to nurse. And so with this algorithm, when you see a kid, you say, oh, is it like that? Yes, no. It is like that? Yes, no. And at the end, you have a diagnosis and a proposition of treatment. So that you don't need to be a psychiatrist to propose a treatment. There are pro and con. The pro is that it exists. The con is that at the end, in the proposition of treatment, if you have CBT and medication, but in general in this country, CBT is not available. So what you will do is to give medication. And so there is a risk that in fact, in low and middle income country, there will be medication for most of patients, and this is not a good solution. The other point, which is a little bit embarrassing with WHO MHGAP, is that this has been written by the president, the head of WHO, in the introduction of the MHGAP. You know, it says that most of the mental, neurological, and substance use conditions can be managed by non-specialist healthcare provider. This is a disaster because when all health insurance saw that, they consider that this is no more necessary to work with you. And second point, this is not true. If it was true anyway, we could change our job. But this is not true, of course. This is not true. So I consider this is a little bit a crime. So my last slide, my conclusion. ABM is good, but sustainability is better. We need health economy. The equation between supply and needs is flexible, and it makes things complex. There is a need to clarify what comes from health insurance and social budget. Training is important, but we don't always know how to do that. E-health technology are promising, and low and middle income countries remind us that cultural specificities are important, even in high income countries.